to Emory's conference, Transactional Education, What's Next? We are truly delighted that you are here. As you know, putting together a conference is a team effort, and I had a great team this year. The steering committee did a terrific job reviewing the proposals, putting together our schedule of programs, and organizing the panels. I'd like to thank Danny Bogart, Deborah Baran, Joan Hemenway, Jeff Lipshaw, and Jane Scott for their terrific work. I also want to thank my assistant, Edna Patterson, who most of you have met. Edna coordinated the conference. She is a one-woman wonder. I would also like to thank Dave Weisenfeld and Andy Weisenfeld. Dave Weisenfeld was the bus captain, my husband. Andy Weisenfeld, the photographer, my son. So this is a full family operation. In addition, I want to thank our sponsors for their financial support. It made a difference, especially this year. Our sponsors in alphabetical order are Aspen Publishing, LexisNexis, Practical Law Company, Transactions, the Tennessee Journal of Business Law, and Westlaw Business. Before we begin the program, I have the always welcomed and highly anticipated announcements. Okay? All of the programs are going to be on the first floor. There are 2 elevators and 1 staircase. The first set of elevators is directly to your left as you come out of Tull. The other set of elevators is by the registration over in that direction, and the stairs are immediately adjacent. Just take them down 2 floors. A quick word about the materials. We bifurcated them into handouts that are going to be in the room and additional materials. Both the handouts and the additional materials are on the CD that was in your bag. If we have extra handouts for any particular program, we will some of the Emory students will put them out on a table so you can get hard copy if you want. If you miss any of the programs, and you will because they're running simultaneously, we are audio taping them, videotaping them, and Transactions, which did our volume of our proceedings 2 years ago, is doing it again this year. If you're interested in purchasing a volume of the program from 2 years ago, they're for sale for $5. So, okay. At the end of each program, please fill out the program evaluation form. It should be the last page of the handouts, and you can hand it in to the Emory student who you should be able to identify with a cap. There is also an overall conference evaluation form, and that's in the last page of the welcome materials, also in your bag. Also in your bag is the Transactional Training Resource Guide, which is a bibliography of transactional training materials. That is also available on the Emory website. And the advantage of going to the website is that there are actually links to where you can get the book volume or the article if you can get to it through a link. I am also delighted to announce that as of about 6 a.m. this morning, if all went well, Emory's Exchange for Transactional Education training materials is operational. The Exchange is a database that electronically stores syllabi, PowerPoint slides, exercises, simulations, and whatever else somebody contributes. Professors and practitioners have access. Most of you should have received your unique username and password when you registered. It should be behind your badge. If you don't have one, you lose one. Edna is the source of everything. There will be a cocktail reception after the last program. If the weather holds, it'll be outside in the very aptly named Bacardi Plaza, which is downstairs on the first floor where you'll be, just outside the glass doors. If it's raining, it will be inside the glass doors. Buses will be available after the last program and after the cocktail party. And that concludes the announcements. Before we leave for the panels, I'd like to spend a couple of moments talking about the state of transactional education. When we were putting together our first program 2 years ago, and we put out the request for proposals, one of the things we asked for was a panel on best practices. Nothing. Nobody submitted anything, not one. In retrospect, that was not surprising. The request was premature. I was giving a talk on my fantasy curriculum, one that I had not yet put in place. And many of you were just beginning to implement curricular change. Best practices were for the future. In 2 years, we've come a long way. Many more schools now have transactional skills courses or have courses that have transactional skills components. But I still don't think we're at the stage of best practices. So many of us are still experimenting. We are creating our pedagogy. But today and tomorrow, you will learn about the strides that we have made in the 2 years. The fact that we've made strides is a tribute to all of you. And it's a tribute because of the significant challenges that we face. And it's those challenges that I'd like to turn to. Perhaps our biggest challenge is convincing our schools that they should expand the transactional skills curriculum. We have for years labored in the shadows of litigation skills training, something our colleagues understand and they support. Deal work, they don't get it. No one is researching cases. Appellate briefs are nowhere to be found. Most of our colleagues are really not quite sure what we do or why it has anything to do with the law, but they do know they don't really want to go near it. Now, the problem is not just a lack of understanding. We labor anonymously. We are nearly invisible within the academy. The McCrate and Carnegie reports gave transactional education short shrift, not recognizing that the skills that we use differ, and therefore our pedagogy is different. Moreover, it seems that U.S. News and World Report doesn't know that we exist. They report on the best legal writing programs. They report on the best litigation skills programs, but they're silent about transactional skills programs. This silence and invisibility hurts us, and it hurts our students, because it makes it that much harder for us to allocate to ask for allocations of what are really very scarce resources. To use a somewhat worn term, we need validation. Now, toward that end, I am delighted to report, now get this, the AALS has granted permission for us to apply for status as a provisional section. So we're not a provisional section, we have to apply for status to be a provisional section. And it took quite a bit to get that. And it will be known as the section on transactional law and skills. Now, to obtain that status, we must submit a petition, among other things, with at least 50 signatories from 25 different schools. Now, to sign on the dotted line, please come to the open program on transactional law and skills at the AALS annual meeting on Wednesday, January 5, from 3:15 to 5:15. Don't worry about writing it down. You can be sure that I will send you more than one email. And at that time, we can also talk about how the section can take our leadership role in transactional law and skills education. And transactional law and skills education is at least 20 years behind litigation skills training. And the reasons are many. But one that's not often talked about is the difficulty that we have had in creating a pedagogy. Litigation is visible, it's audible, it takes place in an open forum where the lawyer's actions are recorded. Professors can show students what litigators do and teach them how to emulate them. We can't do that. Deal work takes place at 11 p.m. on the 22nd floor in a conference room or in an office with the door closed. How do we articulate for our students a deal lawyer's internal process, internal thinking process? That's what we struggle with. We have to somehow make our thinking visible. We need to create vocabulary and analytic frameworks that students can use. Let me give you two quick examples. Teaching students about business issues has long meant taking them through an agreement section by section and explaining to them what business issues are recumbent in each section. But that doesn't teach students to think independently about business issues. At Emory, we teach our students a 5-prong business framework that recur in transactions. These are 5 issues that cut across transactions. They show up in different ways, but they're regularly there. Business risk control, something I call standards and endgame, and if you buttonhole me, I'll take you through what they mean. With this framework, students can look at a provision they've never seen before and they can analyze it. Finding business issues no longer requires a sixth sense. Instead, there's a methodology that students can apply. In addition, we've created a vocabulary for talking about business issues, and we use that vocabulary throughout our transactional skills curriculum. We teach it in contract drafting, it's used in deal skills, and it's used by our professors who teach the simulation courses. It's one of the ways that we keep an integrated transactional skills curriculum, each course related to the one that follows it. Now, for a second example of an analytic framework, go tomorrow to hear Joan Hemenway. She's going to discuss how she uses the legal writing construct IRAC to teach her students how to draft sophisticated provisions in corporate finance agreements. We also face the challenge of finding and hiring qualified professors to teach transactional law and skills. 10 years ago, the Academy included among its number very few faculty who had any transactional practice experience, and even fewer who had significant transactional experience. That's changed. Today, there are not a lot, but there are more experienced transactional practitioners who are members of the Academy. Here's the rub. They are not inclined to teach transactional skills courses. Many of them are refugees from practice who want to be more traditional members of the Academy. That is, they want to focus on more traditional doctrinal issues. They are adamant about including a transactional component in a doctrinal course, but they don't want to teach a transactional skills course. It remains professional suicide, a surefire way to make tenure difficult, if not impossible, to attain. So who's going to teach transactional skills? There are really two groups. The first is adjuncts. At Emory, our transactional skills curriculum is heavily dependent on our adjuncts. They teach almost all of our drafting, deal skills, and simulation courses. We could not have a transactional skills program without them. We're not alone. Most schools rely on adjuncts. If this is our reality, then we cannot be laissez-faire about hiring, training, teaching, and supervision. We must find ways to help the adjuncts excel because the quality of our skills curriculum depends on it. Their role in the transactional curriculum is a mini theme of our conference, and tomorrow it will also be a topic of one of the lunch roundtables. I encourage you to attend. The second group that has become an integral component of the transactional faculty are legal writing professors. Their schools have said, you teach writing, go teach drafting. Drafting is just another kind of writing. To me, these professors are intrepid and a little meshuggah. Now, for those of you who don't speak Yiddish, meshuggah means a little crazy, like your somewhat off favorite uncle. These intrepid, meshuggah professors deserve our support and thanks. Our conference is devoting 2 programs to them. Our challenges also include the relative dearth of teaching materials. 5 years ago, I might have simply said the dearth of teaching materials. We're better off than we were 5 years ago. Now there are probably a dozen textbooks that have some transactional skills focus or that use exercises, simulations, or problems. But this is still a relatively limited selection. Now, it would be easy to blame it on the publishers, but it's not really their fault. And I would say that even if they weren't the sponsors, and even if my publisher weren't here. As I suggested at the beginning of my talk, many of us are experimenting with materials. We are working them through to see what works. Published textbooks, in reality, must be postponed until the materials are ready. But what do we do until then? We as a community must trade what we have. We have to not reinvent the wheel. As I mentioned before, Emory has created an electronic database of materials. So too has the Kaufman Foundation. These are not panaceas, they're stopgaps, but they will only be as good as the materials you contribute. So please contribute to both Emory's Exchange and to the Kaufman Foundation. Now, before I conclude, I'd like to give you some information about that we gleaned from the survey that some of you filled out after registration. As an initial caveat, only about 1/3 of you filled out the survey. And then you didn't answer all of the questions. So these numbers are highly unreliable. Okay? But here are the highlights. The news with respect to the first year is not encouraging. Only about 15% of schools have a contract drafting component in their legal writing courses, while approximately 18% have some transactional skills component in their first-year curriculum. Of the 6 contracts professors who responded, 3 spent only 1 to 2 hours on drafting or other transactional skills. 1 professor did spend between 7 and 8 hours, and I know of 1 professor who apparently did not fill out the survey because he spends more time. The news was better for the upper-level courses. Over 85% of respondents had at least 1 upper-level contract drafting section. Nearly 50% had a transactional clinic, and nearly 80% of respondents had upper-level courses devoted exclusively to teaching to transactional skills. And just over 80% offered transactional simulation courses. I think that those numbers are suspect because I think that there's a fair amount of double counting that was going on. But let's assume that they are good numbers. Those good numbers are good numbers that come from a very select group of people. It's from a self-selected group of professors and schools who are already committed to transactional education. Despite this, I'm encouraged. In the midst of a recession and battered budgets, there are 90 of you here, and many of you have come a long way. So I say, let the conference begin. We'll see you downstairs.